Okay, welcome everyone. Great, well, welcome. I am Dani McClain, and I am so excited tonight to be in conversation with Mia Birdsong. Thanks to everybody who is joining us. We can see some of your comments that you have in the chat. Keep those comments coming. That's going to be where you want to ask questions as we speak, either there or in the Ask a Question, using the Ask a Question tab that you will see at the bottom of your page. And just thanks for making time. There's so many options these days for what you can be doing with your time. So thanks for joining us tonight.
This is the best option right now, though, just to be clear.
Just to be really clear about that, I think everyone knows. So this, yes, we agree. Thank you, Zoe. Ibrahim, okay, this like family reunion. All right, well, so I met Mia 5 years ago in Oakland. I still remember it was at Sweet Bar in Oakland, right across from the Y. That was our first actual in-person meeting. And I knew at that time that she was working on issues related to families. I knew that she was changing tired, misleading narratives around poverty and around low-income families. And that day we talked about our shared interests and how urgent it felt to both of us to create the stories that we knew to be true about families, especially Black families. And since that day, I have followed her work, cheering her on from afar and reaching out when I knew that she had something important to teach me. When I was working on my book about Black mothering, We Live for the We, I called Mia.
Which we should all read.
Yes,
it's amazing.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. I called Mia to ask her about the stories that we hear so often about Black fathers. I was particularly interested in talking to her about that. And her quotes are among my favorite in the book. Brilliant, brilliant insights. And also while doing research for that book, I turned to the work of an organization that Mia co-founded, Family Story. It had commissioned a report that looked at representations of Black families in news media. And it's an incredibly important resource that I drew from. Check it out if you haven't read that report. And most recently, I was riveted by More Than Enough, which is the podcast miniseries that she did with The Nation, in which she does a deep dive into the guaranteed income movement. It's brilliant. It places Black people, people of color, low income and poor people at the center of the story. And it came out at a particularly important moment when suddenly like Andrew Yang was introducing this conversation, and Mia's podcast series just snatched that right back and said, like, no, we need to talk to the people who have been working on this for many, many years, many of whom are Black women and people of color. So as you probably already know, she's a senior fellow at the Economic Security Project. She was an inaugural Ascend Fellow of the Aspen Institute, a New American California Fellow. She speaks widely at conferences and gatherings across the country. And tonight, I'm thrilled to be able to talk with Mia about her new book, How We Show Up, Reclaiming Family, Friendship, and Community. Hey, the double. Reclaiming Family, Friendship, and Community. June 2nd, publication date. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it right now. Just go ahead and pre-order it. Probably Hachette is feeding you a link, or will be at some point, but you can order it through the Hachette page or bookshop.org, any place that.
I'm going to tell you where to order it, actually.
Oh, right.
All right. If you want a signed copy, the only place you can get a signed copy is from Marcus Books. Marcus Books is a landmark historical Black bookstore in Oakland, California, just a few blocks from where I live. And because there are no book tours happening, there's no opportunity for you to come and stand in a line while I sit at a table with a pile of books and sign your book. I am going to sign books at Marcus Books, social distancing, all the things. And they will send it to you if you order it from them. Google Marcus Books, look at their phone number, because you call, you don't order online. This is like for real. You have to interact with a person. You get to talk to Ms. Blanche Richardson, whose parents founded Marcus Books. And you just let her know that you want to order my book and ask her for a signed copy, and you will get one. So that's where you should get the copy of the book.
Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Marcus Books, community institution, national institution. So glad that you all are in partnership around this. So let's get into it. So you write throughout the book, Mia, about interdependence outside of coupledom. You really challenge these notions that the place that we should be looking to for care is like a spouse, or these traditional understandings of like where you find care. And so you give a lot of examples of the ways that this shows up by talking about your own friendships or circles in which you take part. But I'm thinking especially about the section that you write on the creation of the Black Women's Freedom Circle. You write, self-care wasn't enough. We wanted community care. And I'm curious what you think community care looks like now in this moment where we're social distancing, staying at home. And then more broadly, what does interdependence outside of coupledom or outside of the household look like right now?
Yes. So let me first talk about interdependence outside coupledom and kind of what that means and why it's important. So partly it is that, the kind of dominant narrative of how you do life in America is about a nuclear family. And that is kind of predicated on this idea that two adults by themselves can successfully raise children. And that's nonsense. It's not, two people is not enough to raise kids. And the people who I learned that from are mostly single moms. I think most single moms, like my own mother, who has said hello to me in the chat. I love you too, Mom. No. And also one of my aunties is in the chat. One of my chosen family aunties is also in the chat because she helped raise me. Single moms know that you can't raise children by yourselves. So part of how I think about interdependence outside coupledom is partly around raising kids, right? But there are also all these other things that we need in life, especially if we don't have children. And inside of a couple, the idea behind marriage in America is that this is the person who you're going to be roommates with them. You're going to, they're going to be your best friend. You're going to be sexually attracted to them. You are going to manage your household and your finances together. And if you have kids, you're going to raise kids together. And that is a lot of things for two people to actually be able to do well for each other. And I'm sure that there are, some people who can actually fulfill all of those needs for each other. Some very smug people. Right. But that's generally not, that's just not realistic for a relationship. And I think part of our challenges around marriage have to do with this focus we have on our spouse kind of being our everything. Mm-hmm. So for people inside of couples, you need to have support and care and things that you find outside of your relationship, like in deep relationship with other people. And then obviously there are tons and tons of people in America who are not part of a couple. And for those folks, you also need to be spreading around the kind of things that you need from other people, whether that's, sex or, people to have meals with, or the people who are your kind of personal historians and you talk about your past with, or the people who you work your problems out with, whatever it is. There are all these things that we need from our friendships and the people in our communities. And those things we shouldn't be trying to get those things from one person. Mm-hmm. So Black Women's Freedom Circle is it's a women's circle. It's something I started with my friend Amaka. We met in 2015, and on the day we met, we kind of conceived of this idea. And for us, it was really about, we were both in this period where we felt like a lot of the Black women in our orbit were really struggling emotionally, struggling physically. People were getting sick. People were dealing with chronic pain. People were dying. And we knew that all of the kind of regular struggles of life are compounded by our experience of racism and sexism, and that no one's coming to save us. Mm-hmm. And that if we wanted to address those things and really how they show up kind of like in our bodies and our hearts, in our minds and in our spirits, that we needed to do that. So we started Black Women's Freedom Circle to get free, really. Initially we were going to call it like Black Women's Self-Help or something like that. And I was like, no, this is really about us getting free. That's what this is about. Mm-hmm. So we've been meeting since 2016, every month, usually at my house or Amaka's house, in person. And it is one of the most life-giving experiences that I have on a regular basis. It is truly, we have saved each other. We laugh, we cry, we do all the things, and we really care about each other. And we are in contact with each other regularly outside of the circle as well. So when in the Bay, which is where we are, we're all in Oakland or Berkeley, in San Francisco, when sheltering in place started, we kept going, and we actually now meet twice a month. Those gatherings are different outside of the fact that they are virtual, but it really is more about us holding each other through what we're experiencing right now. The trauma of this, the grief of this, the crisis of this, the things that we're learning, the things that are sustaining us. We're just doing a lot of more kind of immediate processing and connecting and sharing with each other. So one of the things I really think about in this time, and I will say this Black Women's Freedom Circle is one of 2 women's groups that I'm part of. I have another one that also was meeting once a month for 4 or 5 years, and now is meeting twice a month. And very similar shifts. The conversations we had when we were in person were much more not abstract, but they were really about examining our lives. And now they're really about like what's happening right now. So I think one of the things that community care looks like right now is circling up, like gathering up with your people. It does not have to be a group of women, but having some regular, close group of people who you're meeting with regularly to just like process, to check in, to say how you're doing, to be asking all of the big questions about like what's happening and what we think the future looks like, to dream with, to imagine with, to like break down with. We've had a lot of that. So I feel like that's one of the things that community care really needs to look like right now. Some of the other things that I've seen, and I will say that, in the book, I'm largely looking to, I'm looking at like the places that I've seen family and community and friendship practiced in the most deeply loving, inclusive, expansive ways have always been with the people who are kind of excluded from America's ideas of success, people who are excluded from achieving the American dream. So Black folks, queer folks, unhoused folks, sex workers, anybody who just like is not a middle-class, white, straight family.
Who hasn't found success and isn't making it in these ways that the kind of American dream narrative has framed what it means.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So like there's this definition of success that we have in the like under the rubric of the American dream. Right. And largely it is based on this this very toxic idea of individualism, and really is in denial about our inherent interdependence. So folks who have been to some degree or another excluded from that are doing family and community and friendship in very different ways. And that's where I feel like I've gotten my best models. So I'm still looking to unpartnered people, to queer folks, to Black people, to poor people for examples of how to get by in this moment. And there are 2 things that have also been like beacons for me in this moment. So one is my friend Mac has been having church every Sunday. It's not a religious thing, but they were wanting to have a place to like be collectively grieving what's going on right now, and recognizing that grief is not always about sadness, but is sometimes about joy, is sometimes about everything, right? So we get together every Sunday and sing, and there's often somebody who leads us, who gives a sermon or leads us in song or whatever. So that's been really powerful for me. And then the other thing is a friend of mine, Mia Mingus, has been doing these meals. And I feel like this is one of, this is kind of obvious, but it also just feels like it's been very organized. And I think it's been a really powerful example of how we show up for each other when we can't actually physically be together. So she just has a group of people, and they cook meals for each other, and then they just kind of like rotate who gets them. And I feel like, I would love to have to only cook once a week.
Right.
that looks like, right? You just like cook a big amount of whatever, and then you deliver those to the folks in your, she has the system called pods, and you deliver them to people in your pods, and y'all just like rotate who gets meals. And they're also delivering meals to people outside of their pods who, for like a variety of reasons, need more support with meals. So I just feel like they're actually like, I'm like, there are all these kind of obvious examples, but I think the other thing is about where we're looking for the solutions to what it looks like in this moment to be caring for each other and what interdependence looks like. And I'm like my like radar goes toward the folks I know who have taught me in the past, like before this, what community and care look like.
It's interesting what you were saying about what Mia Mingus is doing, because the whole pod mapping model that you lay out in the book has become this model that so many of us are turning to in recent weeks, as we're like, okay, when a disaster strikes, how do you know who your people are? How do you connect with your people and ask them specifically for the help that you need? How do you actually support each other? So it was nice to see that work lifted up in your book. There were many things in your book that have come to light as tools that we can use right now, but I know you were writing it, months ago. So
yes, I had no idea that what we were in for. So, and let me just, so Mia Mingus is one of the co-founders of the Bay Area Transformative Justice Collective, and they developed, you can go to their website, and they developed this system called pod mapping. And it's largely meant to, the work that they do is around transformative justice, is largely focused on accountability and healing from sexual trauma. So the pod mapping is both, you're meant to kind of like think about who are the people in your life who you would go to if you experienced harm, and who are the people who you'd go to in your life if you caused harm. So people who could help support you in your healing process, and then people who could help support you in an accountability process, which is also a form of healing. So I think the pod maps, right? Like going through this process of examining your social ties and thinking about who are the folks who you feel closest to and who you want to show up for, is exactly what we need to be doing in this moment, because being in your home, either, with the people you live with or by yourself, is not sustainable. So we really need to have a group of folks who we feel like we can count on. And I think about that in particular when it comes to, if we get sick, right, from the obvious things like coronavirus, but also if a loved one of ours dies, right? Like, how are we going to be supported in our grief? If we need food, if we need help with something, like all the things that we might need in this moment when we can't actually go outside of our houses, how are we going to call in people to support us? I feel like pod mapping is a really good way of getting really clear about who those people are.
Yeah. Let's talk about grief, because it's come up a couple times. So you have a chapter, it's really beautiful. I just want to say your book is so readable. It's as pleasurable, maybe not quite as pleasurable, but it put me in the mind of having a conversation with you, because it's just it's like Mia's just going to tell you some stories about some conversations that she had. And it's a very pleasant read. Very complex ideas, but delivered in a way that's very digestible. So thank you for that. But you have this chapter that opens with an exploration of the grief that you experienced upon your father's passing. And it's really beautiful storytelling about all the people who circled around you, your own mother, your mother in love, your family on your father's side, all these people who came together to support you as an only child. I'm also an only child, so I really could feel that, the pressure that we feel in managing these moments as only children. And then the chapter moves into this larger meditation on what it means to witness another person's grief. I have to tell you, it was the best definition of the phrase holding space that I've ever heard. Because I often am like, oh God, holding space is such a Bay Area phrase. I mean, now it's kind of in the common lexicon, but I remember like a decade ago when I was in the Bay and people would be like, can I hold space? And I was like, it was kind of like, what exactly does that mean? And so you give this really simple, clear definition of what that means. What it means to witness another person's grief, to hold space for them, and what empathy demands of us. And so thinking about this moment, we've already touched on this, in which so many people are grieving. And I just think because it is not acknowledged on a federal level, like there, you know,
Totally.
It's like 90,000 people have died and there's no public recognition.
Moment of silence. There's no like, even like a kind of meaningless national day of grief or anything. There's nothing.
Nothing. And I've had the experience just this week, I've heard some just devastating stories about COVID deaths because of COVID-19, or like their COVID-19 adjacent deaths. And you think there's no public acknowledgement or reckoning with these, what then becomes like a privately held grief that these people are sitting with. So people are grieving lives lost, livelihoods lost, just the kind of grief that comes with the amount of uncertainty that we're all holding around what it means to live in this new moment. What can you share? I mean, you've already shared a few things. I think Max, church and creating these like rituals is very helpful, but what else can you share about how community can help us navigate and survive hardship?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things we do death terribly in America. We're bad at death and we're bad at grief. And I think one of the things that we first need to do is like recognize that people are grieving. And I mean, all of us, right? Like none of us, we're all experiencing loss, right? Whether it's just that we are now our loss of routine, right? Like from like those things to loss of loved ones, and loss of income and loss of doing, my husband is has a recording studio. He's a recording engineer and a musician. Like his studio shut down and he feels tremendous loss because, not just because he's not making any money, but because that was a place where he brought people together to make music. And that piece of like the joy and creativity that existed there is absent right now. So there's like a huge spectrum of loss that we're all experiencing. And I think the first thing we need to do is really recognize that we're all experiencing that. Mm-hmm. And then the thing that I feel like I learned from people is that I'm deeply challenged around what it means to hold space for people, right? Like my instinct when someone is grieving is to want to fix it.
Right.
It is to want to talk and make it better. It is to want to, bring things or whatever, but it really is like this need to fix it. And that is, partly comes from like genuine love for people in my life and not wanting them to be experiencing pain. But it also really comes from my own discomfort with grief and with trauma. So a lot of what I feel like I learned from watching folks who I talk about in the book go through grief and trauma is really watching their loved ones show up for them in a way that really is just about witnessing and listening. And for me, like part of what I'm learning is to just like shut my mouth and like sit in, like I have physical discomfort with not doing anything. And I need to just like sit in that and really just listen and witness. I was listening to, I don't know if I read it or I heard a podcast, but it was a chaplain talking about who like delivers like last rites to people. And he was talking about how he's doing that now. Right. And for him, like one of the things he said is that when you go and you're delivering last rites to somebody, it really is just about, you don't go in with a plan. You go because then you're not going to pay attention to what they actually need. So he goes in and he just really listens and sits in silence with people a lot. So he talked about kind of what that's like on the phone, which is a little weirder, like being in silence on the phone. But I feel like there is a way in which we need to embrace more silence when it comes to holding people's grief. And that it's not about fixing things or making it better, but really just giving space. The holding of space is really for whoever's grieving to do with it whatever they need to do. And sometimes that's going to be talking about, whatever it is that they've lost, a loved one, a job, a sense of normalcy. And sometimes it's going to be about being in silence. And I think right now that feels really important. And that's actually something we still can do. Like I can be on a Zoom call or a FaceTime with somebody and hold space for them and be quiet. I think this is another place where our circles of friends, our pods, whatever they are, kind of however we form them, become really important too, because it's not about me individually holding one other person's grief, but it really is about the people who surround them holding that grief collectively. And that feels really important now too. I think just as we don't want to be grieving alone, we don't want to be holding somebody's grief by ourselves either. I know for me, having a circle of people holding somebody feels much, I'm like, oh, I don't have to do this by myself, right? Like somebody else will be able to like say the right thing or model what it means to like be quiet and just like witness what they're doing. And I feel like I'm being held by the group who's holding whoever it is that's grieving. That feels really important right now too.
I so appreciated your whole exploration, that chapter, just acknowledging that it's not intuitive. Like we don't just know how to be there for people when they are going through significant loss. And that also it can be triggering. Like if we've gone through our own grief and it maybe wasn't held well, then we can feel nervous about showing up for someone else as they're grieving. So you just dealt with it with so much complexity. And I learned a lot reading that chapter. I think it's especially useful for us right now in this moment.
I think the other like practical thing that I learned from folks, not just around grief, but around hardship in general, is so throughout the book, there's a whole, I feel like, theme about our discomfort with asking for help and our fear of like providing help wrong, right? And several folks talked about, not doing the like, let me know what you need thing, but being like brave in this way that just allows you to decide how you're going to support somebody. So, reaching out to somebody and being like, I think like right now, right? Hey, I know you are parenting in your home by yourself and you have work to do. Can I get on, Zoom with your kid for an hour to let you like go take a shower or, have an hour to yourself or whatever. So like offering really specific things that are like within your capacity, or can I make, double the size of whatever I'm making for my own family tonight and bring you some so you don't have to worry about that.
Right.
I think just trusting our intuition a little bit about what we know about the people in our lives and the people that we're close to and what might be useful to them. And, and also recognizing that people might be like, no, and that's not personal. It's not about you. But being specific with the offer, I think makes it, because people have such a hard time asking for help when they need it. I think being specific with the offer is super supportive.
Yeah. No, I really appreciated in your discussions really, because this question around asking for help carries through much of the book. And you talk about how like often there's shame or some kind of hesitation on the part of the person asking, but then also a scarcity mindset on the part of the person who might offer. So we have to step outside of the scarcity mindset to realize how to think in more complex ways about generosity and how to be generous.
Totally. And I think that's also a place where we need to be looking at a collective and not like an individual to individual exchange. So I often now think about if I need something, like what's the group of people that I can ask instead of the single individual, so that if one person, because people's capacity shifts all the time. And I'm like, if one person says no, I'm gonna have a much harder time asking the next person. So can I ask a group of people and know that like, at least one of them is gonna figure out how to come through for me. I actually want to read a quote from the book about help that's super informative to me. So the extremely wise Amaretta Morris, she like posted this on Facebook, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years ago. And I copied it down then because it was so powerful to me. So she wrote, it's okay to ask for help. In fact, by doing so, you are taking part in the divine circle of giving and receiving. While we often focus on what the request means for the asker or recipient, we should remember that giving can be transformative for the help. But for help when you need it, you are blocking that flow. I mean, like realizing that part of being in relationship and in community with people means that I have like an obligation to ask for help when I need it, just like blew my mind, like thinking about it that way, that in some way partly I think there are lots of reasons, right? There's the fact that people who love you want you to be well and are invested in your wellness. And if you're not asking for help, then you are not respecting the fact that the people in your life want you to be well.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's part of it for me. I think another part of it is thinking for myself, like how restorative it can be for me to be supporting somebody else or to be providing somebody else with help. And that like actually asking for help can be a gift that we give the people in our lives, because it means they get to show up for us in a way that is restorative for them. And I just I hadn't thought about that at all until I read that. And I felt like it gave me a little bit of permission to figure out how to ask for help.
There's a quote, I think it's from Sage Crump, where Sage is talking about like finding out after the fact that someone in your community has suffered, and that it just breaks your heart. Cause it's like,
yes.
I'm here for you.
Exactly.
I don't want you to suffer in that way. And knowing that I could have helped if I had known.
Yeah.
And so that I really appreciated that. So there are some incredible questions that are coming in. Thank you.
Okay.
So please, if you haven't asked a question and you have one, you can either chat it, or the easier way for me to see it and make sure I don't miss it is to go to the ask a question option at the bottom of your screen and put it there. But I'm going to take the privilege of being moderator and put one last of my questions to you, and then we'll go to other folks' questions. So I'm thinking about, there's a quote. So I'm thinking about the stories of two unpartnered mothers that you share. And there's a quote from Tiny of Poor Magazine. Tiny is talking about, well, I'll let you kind of give the context to what Tiny's talking about, but the quote is, isolation kills. And for single parent women, that's a different kind of beast. It really almost killed us many times. And then there's another section earlier in the book where there's an unpartnered mom, or a mother who ends up becoming unpartnered because of her situation, the context of her situation, Angela. And I'm just wondering, I want to just put the attention on single parents, unpartnered parents for a moment. What did you learn from them about the challenges, I guess, specifically surrounding asking for help and getting their needs met? And what can their stories teach us about building community and looking to our communities for support?
So unpartnered parents are dealing not just with the specificity of their own context, but also the narrative that we put on them, right? And especially unpartnered mothers, right? So these two women are speaking to this, and I think many of the women I talked to who are single moms talked about this. But they're viewed as having made a mistake. So there's this additional pressure to prove that they can just do everything on their own, right? That if they have some furniture to move, they're going to move it themselves. That they can balance, working and raising children and maintaining a household and the cooking and all the things, right? There's this pressure to come across as super women because our society is already condemning them for an alleged mistake that they made. But ultimately, they are also some of the most powerful examples I have of community building. So Tiny, who I've been a total fangirl about since my daughter was a baby. So for at least 14, 15 years now, she is a formerly unhoused person. She's a mother. She and the Poor Magazine folks have created this amazing community in Deep East Oakland called Homefulness, which was really a vision that she and her mother came up with when they were living on the streets. And both she and Angela, who you also mentioned, have part of what they talk about is the way in which they had to transform their narrative about themselves to embrace this idea that of course, I can't do this by myself. I absolutely need people. And I think for Angela, she reached a breaking point because she was in an abusive relationship and she finally just had to get out and, told people what was going on with her, and folks just like showed up and got her housing, supported her around work, watched her kid. And she also recently was dealing with illness. This isn't in the book. This is just because I know her and we're friends. She was recently dealing with illness, and the same community that she had showed up for her around that. So part of what it says to me is that like all of us are going to need people at some point in our lives, right? Like we can, and I've done this too. Like I've long lived with this illusion that I could be like deeply independent and just like handle all my shit myself and not have to rely on anybody. And then something happens and falls apart and you have to ask people for help. And those experiences have taught me that I can't just be relying on people when there's a crisis, but I actually need to be cultivating like getting help and support in my life when like things are fine, right? It's not just about like, I'm only going to ask for help when I absolutely need it, but I'm going to ask for help when like, okay, I could do this thing, but like, that doesn't mean that I have to, or I should. And I want to create like more room for people to be in my lives. And like, subsequently, like I'm also trying to be in their lives so that we're just like creating more ease for each other, right? It's not always about crisis. So I feel like, you know, I mean, America in general is we are allergic to asking for help because we're not supposed to. We're all supposed to be pulling ourselves up by our own bootstraps and like, you know, just making everything happen on our own. And that is like sad and lonely and devastating and horrible. And it is. I mean, I think part of what I learned from the process of researching and writing this book is like how much more joyful and easeful and loving and beautiful my life is when I'm cultivating like these deep relationships and allowing people to be in my life and allowing people to show up for me and doing the same for them.
Ebony in the chat is said, I really appreciate the new term unpartnered mothers. And I just want to thank you for acknowledging that. I think that is part of what we need to start doing is claiming labels for ourselves that actually fit. So I refer to myself as an unpartnered parent because I'm not a single parent. And I think if I were to call myself a single parent, that plays into this tired, played out narrative that Mia was just talking about, that we are isolated, we're on our own. To call myself a single parent discounts the work that the support that my mom, you know, my child's grandparents offer, that my friends offer, that extended family offers. So I just wanted to acknowledge Ebony for you know, appreciating this phrase and encourage all of us to only claim the labels for ourselves that actually fit and that work, so that we're not, you know, buying into narratives that don't fit and that are not accurate. Let's see. No, so we're waiting for Mia to reconnect. Maybe, am I connected? Oh no. Am I still connected? Can someone just chat me and let me know if you can see and hear me? Okay, thank you, Ibrahim. Okay, great. So Mia is gonna log back in, which means that I'm gonna take this time once again. Oh, I actually have a section of her book that I wanted to read, that I'll, you know, it's her book. It's better in her words, but this is just a part that really stood out to me. So she's writing about, well, I'll let the words speak for themselves. She's writing about a fire that happened in her neighborhood. She's gardening in her yard and she hears someone yell fire, and then, oh, she's back. Hi, Mia.
All right. Can you all hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Okay. Great.
Yay.
I was just about to.
Of course, now I cannot hear Dani.
That's okay.
So I don't know what she's saying.
I was about to read an excerpt from the
I
book.
love technology.
Okay, well, we can circle back to that excerpt if we need to, but we don't need to because there are so many great questions.
Maybe she can just, Dani, if you have a question for me, maybe chat me.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Trina.
Okay. So let's do this question from the chat. Let's see.
My goodness.
So the question,
how are you supporting? So this is my mother's question. How am I supporting my kids? Trying open in a new window. I did that, but I can try it again. I'll do it again. I'm gonna be right back.
Okay. So you will get me doing a reading from Mia's book. Okay. So she's saying, she said, so again, there's a fire in her community, and she says, I live beyond fire. There are any number of scenarios I can think of where knowing the people around me makes me safer. Maybe it's because I live in California with its unpredictable earthquakes, seasonal fires, and regular droughts. Or maybe it's my consumption of science fiction.
Are you reading something I wrote?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, great. Okay, we're good. We're good.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for putting it down, Dani.
All right. Great. Okay, we're here. So do you want to take that question from your mom?
From my mom?
Yeah.
How am I fostering my children's interdependence in their lives? That's a good question. Okay. I mean, largely, I think with them, it is really about what we're modeling. I also think kids are actually better at this. I think both of them are, if I think about my daughter, who is a high school student, they're both right now sheltering in place and having to stay connected with people. Yes, they are. Trina's kids are better at a lot of things. She's got like her homies and her friends who she like talks to about whatever they talk about. And my son is he's in an amazing environment where he like interdependence is actually deeply part of the like ethos of the school that he's part of. So they're getting some of that like out in their world. And then I think a lot of it is about what we're modeling and how we're talking about things. Like they see me and Nino, my husband, asking other people for help. They see, Black Women's Freedom Circle meets at my house. And I mean, they all leave when all my women come over, like to be clear, but they see how important it is for me to be making time for me to circle with Black women. And I talk to them about, some of the stuff that we talk about. But I'm hoping that what they're seeing is the way in which we show up for our people and the way in which our people show up for us is just like part of, it's part of life. So that's what I'm doing, Mom.
So it's kind of a related question, taking a topic that we've explored together, but kind of shifting it into the realm of how do we do it with our children. Someone asked, how do we grieve with our children? How do we know our children's grief?
So, I mean, I think one of the hardest things because I have that, reaction in my body to other people's pain, like that is like triple when it comes to my own kids. I feel like I had to read how you deal with kids' pain, which is largely just like affirming it and not trying to get them to, be done with it. So I think one of the things that I don't know where I read this, but I'm glad I read this parenting book when my daughter was little, was really about, when your kid hurts themselves or they are emotionally upset about something, is to like let them have their feelings.
Yeah.
And just like, if they're really little, like kind of reflecting back to them what you see, right? So I often do if my son would hurt himself, I'd be like, that really hurt, didn't it? Right? That's it. Like, and I hold him and he cries. And, or with my daughter right now, like she definitely has these moments of just being so over all of this. And I just say to her, I'm like, this totally sucks, doesn't it? And she's like crying, and just really it's that just like affirming that what they're feeling is real and, not trying to rush them through it. My son was having a really hard time, like doing homework or something. And his homework is like, because his school is awesome. It's like a book club and they've got like graphic novels and he has to like write something. And he just like was sobbing in a way that made me feel like it was not really about the homework. Like and my therapist, who I like both, who is in the book, like I interviewed her for my book. I remember her saying like, yeah, like that could be about something that happened last week. That could be about something that happened a year ago. It could be about like from his birth, like who knows, but all that stuff is in there and it just all needs to come out. And part of how we ensure, or part of how we make it less likely that we're all going to be holding old trauma is by like allowing our, like feelings are meant to flow through us and be felt. And I think with kids in particular, because they are better at us at feeling their feelings, like just not trying to like stop them or contain them and just like allowing them to have all those feelings feels really important. And so I feel like the same thing is true with grief right now. And part of it too, if we're talking about like actual death of loved ones, right, is like them knowing that we're sad also, and that like this is super crappy for us too. And we also don't like this. It's not about them feeling like everything is going to like be okay, or that like they don't need to worry about it, but like just like acknowledging that it totally sucks for them and it sucks for us too.
Yeah, I think that question, by the way, is from Trina Green Brown at Parenting for Liberation. Thank you, Trina, for being
I do not have your book is gorgeous, Trina. I do not have it in my room. Do you have it with you? Show it.
No, I don't have it
yet. Mine's in somewhere else. I can't reach it. But Trina also has a book that's amazing about parenting that you all should read,
called Parenting for Liberation. So
yes,
also out soon. You can get that. Thank you for being here, Trina. But yeah, I think that's an important point about, I think what is new for many of us is feeling permission to show our real emotions, even when they're rough and hard, in front of our kids. Because I'll speak for myself, I wasn't always raised with that. I think many people in our parents' generations believe that that part of helping us feel safe was for them to be stoic and for them to show up as if they always had everything in control. And I know that because that's mostly what was modeled for me, not always, but that I'm really having to go through my own learning to be like, can I cry in front of my 3-year-old? Is that going to scare her, or not good for her? Right. So I just want to acknowledge that it can be a learning for a lot of us.
Totally. My mom, who is here again, hi mom, I think really did actually model like having your feelings and talking about your feelings. And for whatever reason, when I became a parent, I was like, I need to have all my shit together and be like, the kind of mythical creature in my kid's life who just like is all knowing and can take care of everything. And I have had to like break down all that stuff as well and be a person with them. And I think for me, that has mostly come out as being really clear with them that I'm screwing up all the time as a parent, and apologizing when I screw up as a parent, and letting them know that like, I'm going to keep screwing up and I'm going to keep working on it and try to be better, but like that they're definitely going to have like baggage, right, from their childhoods. But I want to I'm trying to help them identify what that stuff is right now, so that they don't have to spend time actually figuring it out. They can just like heal from it. Whereas I feel like most of us don't realize what our damage is until we're in our 20s or 30s. And then we got to like figure it out and still like heal from it. So I'm trying to like, get them a little bit ahead.
And so does that mean like giving them the tools to heal from it now? Or are you like, write this down in your journal that you're keeping for when you start therapy so you can?
No, I think it's most, I think some of the tools, but I think mostly it's just like acknowledging, that I see, my daughter's 14, so I see some of her stuff. And I can be like, oh, like I'm a overly critical parent. So like, this is how I see that show up in you. And just know that like, when you're in your 20s and you decide you don't like that anymore, like this is where it came from. And you can like, work through it. But I just want her to know that like, that's not like who she is. And it didn't come from nowhere.
Right. It's not a mystery. That's really
exactly
helpful. Salem asks, if you've internalized this narrative of individualism, it can even be difficult to be in tune with your own non-physical needs. How do you recommend getting in touch with what your needs are, and how do you find language to communicate them?
Oof. I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm still like figuring all of that out. So I would say that like one of the things that I've found is that like our bodies know. Mm-hmm. Like stuff often, my body often tells me things about how I'm feeling before I'm aware of it, either like kind of intellectually or emotionally. I will like, you know, if I get activated about something, I often feel like, you know, like tightness in my chest or, you know, like in my shoulders, or I start getting nauseous or, you know, whatever it is. Like, I feel like our bodies actually have ways of letting us know that stuff is going on for us before we might intellectually. So I feel like there's a way in which, for me, it's been about paying attention to that. Mm-hmm. And then slowing down, like, I mean, so this is like an arc of what you're talking about is this kind of like arc of building your self-awareness. And there's no, as far as I, like, what I do know is there's no like magic to that. It really is just like the process of like catching yourself when you're getting activated or catching yourself when you feel that like your stomach got tight for, and you're being like, and then being curious about it, right? Like not being judgmental and just being like, like I noticed that I did this thing, or I'm feeling, like that feeling in my chest and something feels urgent to me. And like, is it really urgent? And like asking all those questions to just like check in and then see what you really need. And the articulating of it too, right? If we're asking other people for stuff, right? This comes up in, I mean, it comes up in my marriage. It comes up in my friendships. You know, I don't remember what the quote is exactly, but there's this Audre Lorde quote about, it's like the kind of like, you know, that not saying silence, right, doesn't get you what you want. Right. So it's about like becoming like less afraid of the truth of what it is you need and what you want. And I feel like that is super helpful for me, being like, if I don't say anything, I'm definitely not getting what I need. Right. And I might be afraid to ask for what I want because the answer might be no, but I'm not going to know unless I ask for it. Right. Or the person might be incapable of providing me with whatever that is, but then that's good information for me to have about the relationship. And that's all it is. It's information. It's not judgment about me. It's not like, you know, thank you, Trina.
Yeah. My silence had not protected me. Your silence will not protect you. But for every real word spoken, for every attempt I had ever made to speak those truths for which I am still seeking, I had made contact with other women while we examined the words to fit abridging our differences. While we examined the words to fit a world in which we all believed, bridging our differences. Audre Lorde. Thank you, Trina. And what is really beautiful about that quote is the part, I had made contact with other women while we examined the words to fit a world in which we all believed. And Mia, listening to you talk, I was reminded of the section in your book that's about your relationship with Mariah, your daughter's former teacher, who becomes your friend, because sometimes I would think part of knowing what you need is being in community with the right people who tell you that it's okay to need what you need, and who will ask you the questions that draw out of you, like, this is actually exactly what I need. Yeah. I don't know if like you want to talk about that part of like how, you know, Sure. This is a person with type 1 diabetes who, you know, if you wanted to share it, I thought it was so touching.
So Mariah, yes, was my daughter's K1 teacher. And I just immediately, like, she and I have a lot in common, and I immediately just like loved her. So when my daughter was leaving first grade, I said to her, I said, will you be Stella's auntie? And can we be friends? And I feel, you know, I don't know, like, I feel like the last time I asked somebody to be my friend, I was like, you know, in kindergarten, but I was like, will you? And she said yes. And I was like, yay. So, you know, so she and Stella have this really beautiful relationship. So my daughter's now 14 and she was 6 or 7 then. So they have this really beautiful relationship where they, like, you know, they used to have, when we could be in person with each other, they had sleepovers and like would go out for, you know, dinner. The three of us all went to Paris together for Stella's birthday one year. And then she and I, like, she's family to us. She's family to all of us. She's family to my son and my husband as well. And she is unpartnered and lives by herself. And she's type 1 diabetic. And she's been managing her diabetes since she was like, you know, 8 or something. And like over the years, there'd be like, you know, when we became close, there'd be a couple of times when she would just like text me and a couple of other people if her blood sugar got low. Because she wanted us to check in with her, like, you know, in half an hour, make sure she wasn't in a coma. And this, at some point, I was just like, well, she's like, what happens if something goes down for her, right? Like, part of what's built into the American dream narrative is this assumption that, like, you know, you're going to get married, and then that person is going to be the person who takes care of you if you get sick, right? I mean, it's in the vows, right? In sickness and in health. So I'm like, I know that if I fall and get into like, you know, an up in a coma or whatever, like Nino gonna come and like deal with it. So I was like, oh, well, how do we like bust down like those boundaries and create a context in which like this person who is, I consider family, like I can be for her, like a person who will take care of her if like she gets sick. So I asked her, and I was like, you know, she definitely prides herself on her independence. And I was a little worried about being invasive. And I was like, well, I was like, and maybe she already has people who do this for her. So I said, I was like, hey, you know, if you like have to go to the hospital or whatever, like, is there a way, can I just know more about your medical stuff? And no one had ever asked before. And it's not because her friends, like her other friends, are assholes. It's because we don't do that. It doesn't occur to us that we're going to be those people for our friends, because there's assumption that your spouse is going to be that person for you. So she like created a Google Doc with all of her medical information in it. She showed me like how to inject her with insulin if I need to. And she is like, you know, and I think it's like me asking has made her more open to the idea of asking other people to like help. So there's like a little group of us who kind of know what's going on with her. If her blood sugar is low, there are two of us who she'll text. You know, I have an app on my phone that tells me if her blood sugar gets too low. She has texted me in the middle of the night, and I've gone to her house to check on her and make sure she doesn't like fall out. And I think initially she was really like, she would always apologize, right? When she like had and then, you know, and we always were just like, are you kidding? Again, like it's the same thing that I think Sage says in the book, right? Like if you did not call and something happened, we'd be pissed. Like we'd be so upset. So you better call. Like, I'm like, you better ask me to come over to your house at 1 a.m. to make sure you don't fall out, because if you did, I would be mad. So, yeah, I just feel like I've learned a lot from that relationship about how to be close to people and how to like be in each other's business, in a way that our kind of the dominant culture doesn't really allow for.
Right. Well, I'm just feeling so full from this conversation and the great questions. I apologize, we weren't able to get to every single question, but I'm also aware that it's coming up on 7:00 and I want to be respectful of folks' time. And I just want to thank everybody for taking time out of your evening or afternoon, depending on where you are, and joining us for this conversation. Just a reminder that Marcus Books has everything you need, signed copies of Mia's book. And again, if you haven't listened to the More Than Enough podcast and you just need more Mia in your life, I totally understand and support that. And I encourage you to listen to that as well, in addition to buying and reading the book. Mia, do you have any closing words that you'd like to say?
Dani, thank you so much for doing this with me.
My pleasure.
I love it. This is good. Thank you so much. And I'm going to follow me on Instagram. There's going to be lots of really interesting stuff that I'm going to start releasing in the next week or so. She's a fantastic moderator. So Dani did this for Trina also like last week. So y'all can find the link to that and also listen to that conversation, to be clear. No, I just really appreciate this, Dani. And I'm excited for this book to be out in the world, because the people who shared their stories with me are extraordinary, and y'all need to learn from them.
Thank you, everyone.
All right.